help women, save lives, and peacefully end abortion where you live.
I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired.
You were serious about that?
Be inspired to change hearts and minds by joining over 1 million volunteers taking part in the global movement happening in your neighborhood.
She says, pray that I can get through this abortion. And I said, oh, no. So she went ahead and went into the abortion clinic. And she just came out. She told us, I'm not going to get the abortion. We just had a baby saved. We had a baby saved in Memphis today. Praise the Lord.
This is the 40 Days for Life podcast with your host, Sean Carney.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the 40 Days for Life podcast. I am Sean Carney, the president of 40 Days for Life, and your host for this podcast, which is dedicated to helping you end abortion where you live. We have a great episode for you today where we are going to talk about the necessary or unnecessary discussion regarding the gay and lesbian community and abortion. Their connection, are they two totally separate things? Why should they be connected? Why shouldn't they be connected? Is it off track? What does it have to do with one another? So we will cover that today, since this will be, we promise, our last episode where we reference June and Pride Month. We've covered it a lot because we cover the culture, and June this year was the Pride Month that wasn't. So we did a podcast on that previously. We also covered the LA Dodgers, and we just see the overall hostility towards Christianity, towards Catholicism. And of course, we don't have the luxury of saying, well, you're just a Catholic phobe or Christian phobe, or you're a bigot, and then win the argument. Many movements do. Let's talk about that today. They're built on that, and we don't have that luxury. So today we will cover the connection, or the lack of connection, with the abortion issue and the LGBTQ movement. And to join me on this podcast today is Mr. Steve Carlin from Wisconsin. Steve, for those of you who are unaware, we're going to talk about this. Steve is entering a depression because it's late August, which means it's like 54 degrees at night, probably, which I would love because it's just brutal here. Everything's dead in Texas. And I never thought I'd want a hurricane to come, but we just need rain. So Steve is bracing himself for winter. I, on the other hand, am just flying high of positive thoughts and optimism, because this is the time I leave my Aggie football depression from last season and many seasons previous to last season, which end in disappointment. And I jack myself up. It's August. All things are possible. I feel good. And I'm switching places in the depression booth with Steve Carlin. Steve, how are you?
Hey, Sean, I'm doing great. And there is no fall depression this year. First of all, I am turning over a new leaf. I am an optimist now. I'm a glass half full type of guy from this moment on.
Is that because of Dobbs?
I think I should say yes, and I was not at all planning to talk about how this is the fall that I finally have my Green Bay Packers season tickets. It's definitely Dobbs.
It starts. I forgot. I got to come up. What game are you taking me to?
Name your date. Name your date. We'll do it. We've been to the game before. It was great. Every year now I'm going to look and see if Dallas is on the home schedule, and there's no option for that this year, but maybe next year.
Yes. That is a must. And that's kind of good because, as you know, I have to have foot surgery in a couple of weeks. I wouldn't be able to fly. So that would actually be torture because I wouldn't be able to go. But really looking forward to that one day of going back to Lambeau. And I'm glad that you turned a new leaf. I'm glad that it wasn't maybe the hope of the resurrection or the fact that divine providence always wins out that has given you hope this fall, but it was the Packer tickets. And I think our Lord can work with that. He can build on that for you to have more of a hopeful outlook overall.
That's one way to look at it. Another would be that the Lord says, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all the rest will be given unto you." So maybe I just sought that first, and then that's how the Packer tickets came.
And the rest are the Packer tickets. Oh, mercy. Well, A&M has been so disappointing. And last year was a disaster. It was just awful. I shouldn't even have brought it up. But I left that behind. It took me, 8 months to get over. And now is when you have all the hype so that we can have the hopefully mid-October letdown. Hopefully we make it that far. We didn't.
What's the outlook this year?
Gosh, this is like asking me my favorite food, so subjective.
You do the thing where you go through the schedule and you're like, you say they're all going to be wins, but you're not completely unrealistic. There's one game like at Alabama, they'll lose, but all the rest are wins. And that's your prediction for the season.
Yeah. We got Alabama at home this year. We had them at home in 2021 and we upset them. So I did that back in early summer and I had us at 7-5 and everybody like my stepbrother, everybody just like blows a gasket. Like, oh, you're a 2%er. I find myself now adding wins to those. Like, you know what?
Ooh.
We can beat Tennessee. We could upset Alabama. We can beat Auburn. Auburn's going to be better. But I'm optimistic because they've recruited all these people. They were just horrible last year. And we're betting on two things. Our new quarterback is phenomenal, and he was the number one recruit. And he got to play 3 games or 4 games last year, and he was phenomenal. So he's coming, and he's a dual threat. And we have a new offensive coordinator. And we got rid of some bad eggs. I think the locker room was toxic.
Oh,
so that's the optimism. The realism is that they were 5-7 last year. It was a total disaster. They were preseason ranked 6th. They totally imploded. They lost to App freaking State. Although Boone, North Carolina is beautiful. I've spoken there. And they win 2 more games than last year. So I'm going to be optimistic. Right now, let's just say they'll win 11 games and go to the college football playoff. Let's just get it out of the way since it's August. But that brings up, you have talked about the Rubber Ducks. What's the name of your football team?
The Thunder Ducks, Rip City Thunder Ducks.
So my freshman year at A&M, St. Mary's, which is the Catholic Center. It's the largest Catholic student center in the country. Great place. All the churches for students in College Station, if you're listening, parents, Catholic, Protestant, doesn't matter. They're all great. A&M, for being a massive school, it's super conservative. It's the number one feeding ground for the CIA, the FBI. It's very pro-military. We get a flyover every football game, and it's done by alum who are flying the jets, and they come out at halftime and wave. And it's just hand over heart university. A&M's great. Bush Senior's library is there. He didn't even go there. He just loved A&M. So anyways, we had, when I was in college, the God Bowl, which St. Mary's, the big Catholic center, we won my freshman year. And all the churches, all the student churches, so the Baptist, Grace Bible, which was the non-denominational church, they were really good. They should have won it that year. But we upset Grace Bible. It's like 12 churches. So you're playing everybody. The Methodists have a team. It's a lot of fun. And obviously in good spirit. It's a little competitive. And it was funny. And everybody thought it was hilarious because the championship game, you go through like 6 rounds or whatever. And the championship game was between the Catholics and the Jews. And it was like the oldest ones. And so it was really, really funny. And we beat them, which I always felt weird about saying we beat the Jews. But so we like started naming their synagogue because it just didn't sound right, as we see anti-Semitism on the rise. But they were very good. And what was funny, Steve, is all stereotypes came true. So you know how in flag football, you're like running out, and if you're always like yelling at your teammates, whether you're on defense or whether you're a receiver or whatever. And so they would yell Jewish names. They'd be like Joshua, Abraham, Isaac, and then like when the Catholics were yelling our names, it was like Michael, Dominic, it was just absolutely hysterical. But I ended up catching a 65-yard touchdown pass in that game, Steve, and I just wanted to thrown by my roommate who became my brother-in-law. But that was my like highlight this time of year. All the great memories that I had at Texas A&M. I think winning the God Bowl my freshman year, and we just like went on a run. They probably don't even do it anymore because like we're woke and you can't. I don't know. The churches they're not allowed to play each other or compete or whatever. But it was a very good feel good tournament, and you're only going to get something like that at A&M.
What does the trophy of the God Bowl look like?
We had Christians and Jews, so it wasn't like some big like cross or something. It was odd. I remember like we're sitting there holding it up. There's no cell phones, right? There's no camera cell phones back then. This is like 2001. But it was like a bowl. It was like they didn't know how to make the God Bowl trophy because they don't want to be disrespectful to God. And they don't want to, there's no like money. I think there's like $5 to play in this league. So it looked like the Stanley Cup met the Vince Lombardi trophy.
Okay.
Like it had like a thick stem, and then it was like this weird cup that was supposed to be the bowl, and that it had no religious connotation. And then it said God Bowl Champions 2001, and that was it.
So was there a new one each time, or did you pass it along each year?
I think there was a new one each time because you put it in your, not in your church, like in the sanctuary, but you put it in like the student activity center, like near the ping pong tables to send a message. Yeah. So it was super fun. Like flag foot. I mean, I have 8 kids and an extremely busy life as you do. Sometimes a stressful job as we are approaching our activities with the DOJ. But, I mean, how awesome would it be to be on a flag football team right now? I would get nothing done. I would get no work done. I wouldn't be at my kids' stuff. I would just like train for flag football and like watch game film. It would just be the end of me.
Drawn up plays guy, you'd be like, I think we can pull off a zone blitz on. Yeah.
The 40 Days for Life starts tomorrow. One second. Hold on. I'm going to write up this screen. Okay. So transitioning out of that. Well, obviously, we think these two issues are connected. The gay and lesbian movement, there's two things here, right, Steve? There are people that have tendencies in same-sex attraction. That's a real thing. No one denies that. Just as people have tendencies to sleep with everybody in the class, or they have tendencies for pornography, or they have tendencies for whatever sexual disorder. Okay. That's set aside from this. We're setting that aside because that's as we've said on the podcast, that's just a sin. That's just a struggle. It's not your identity. It's not this overwhelming, like reorchestrate your entire lifestyle and identify, like tell everybody you are. I had like a taxi driver one time. Like I got in the car and I told him where I needed to go. And he's like, well, I'm gay. And I was just like, what? And so I said, oh, okay. I'm not. We got all that out of the way. But just this whole thing where it dominates every aspect of what you do, what you think, how you vote, all of that. So today we're talking about how is that movement connected to the abortion issue. And the first person, because I thought it was kind of separate. Like there's like in high school, there's gay and lesbians back then. That's all there was. And there's abortion. And Alan Keyes spoke at our event in 2006. And gay marriage was still like a foreign thing. It was never going to happen. It was about to get voted down twice in California in 2008. Barack Obama and every other Democrat were pro-marriage, the only marriage, man and woman. So it wasn't an issue. And Alan Keyes just went on this like part of his talk where it was so impressive. And I thought, where is he going? And he said that gay marriage would happen because if you can snuff out, that was his words, if you can snuff out the fruit of marriage in the womb, then you can snuff out and redefine the institution that produces that fruit. And I was like, dang, And then, of course, here we are.
Yeah, we've come a long way, and it happened really quickly because if you remember, I'm a political junkie. In the 2004 election, the Bush campaign did a very clever job of getting these marriage referenda on ballots all over the country. And so you'd have people who were maybe otherwise apolitical, but they had kind of this common sense idea of like, well, of course, marriage is between a man and a woman. So they put these ballot initiatives out, and it helped drive voter turnout for people who are inclined to vote for Bush. It's kind of, we see the opposite thing happening now with marijuana referenda all over the country. But it turned so quickly. And it's really, in some ways, I think, a little bit of a model for what a social movement would aspire to do, just hopefully for good, not for evil. But this is the thing where there is a real connection. And I think sometimes we need to take the abortion industry at their word. That they say things like, well, when you protect unborn babies, the LGBTQ community is hit the hardest. And we kind of scratch our heads and say, scientifically, that doesn't seem like it checks out. But nobody will argue, if anybody will argue harder than you and I will, Sean, that these two issues are connected, it's the abortion industry and the LGBTQ movement.
Yeah, correct. And there's also an issue with, because I study the homosexual movement more than any other movement aside from like the civil rights movement, where you're creating this constructive tension. And the homosexual movement has been brilliant. I think that now they've deviated from that. I think they're in trouble and they're going down. And we talked about that on why Pride Month kind of was a dud and got resistance after people just saying, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to be labeled a homophobe. Love who you love. Just leave me alone. And that didn't work. And now people are actually going, this is really being forced down my throat. And that's where they got away from it, because it started in the 90s and early 2000s. What you're talking about is, why do you care who we love? Like, what's wrong with you? We've been persecuted. We love each other, and let love be love. Which sadly is a St. Francis of Assisi quote. Why is love no longer love? Let love love. But he was doing it, talking about the corruption in the church. But now it's militant, and it's forced, and it's the people representing the movement 10 years ago even are just not the same. It's not the same. It's not the corporate kind of gay guy saying, we deserve equal protection under the law, and this, we need gay marriage, and look at the divorce rate. Why should we be any different? Why are we being targeted? We love each other. There's legal issues. And now it's the flamers. It's the militancy. It's you will teach this to your kids or else. It's the chanting we saw. We're coming after the kids. Certainly aligning themselves, which they had to do. A lot of gay people have said that. They don't like the trans thing at all. They think it's BS. Gender's important to them because they're gay, and they're like, I'm attracted to the same gender. So I really need to know if you're a guy or not, and you just can't be deciding every other week. So that's one of the issues, is the trans movement sort of invading and dominating as the new trendsetter. How far can we push the limit? But going back to the early 2000s, well, first off, people should know 4% of the U.S. population identifies as gay. So the whole, even like the 1 in, that was always a big thing. 1 in 10 guys are gay. And it's just like this gene, and it's inevitable. That's not true. And so when you look at that now, everybody just is identifying as trans or gays. But I think that their movement, which was built on being the victim and then accusing others of persecuting them, that worked. And they've gotten away from that.
They have gotten away from it. And I think it's an opportunity for us, as we've talked about. This was sort of the Pride Month, was the dog that didn't bark this year. And I think it's an opportunity for pro-lifers. We've seen great strides in the pro-life movement with the Dobbs decision, with the state of the Supreme Court, with all of the different states and now regions that are becoming pro-life and protecting unborn children in their laws. And I think this is an exciting moment because it's an opportunity where we can build on that success into the sexuality and gender push. This is the first time it's kind of like that turning point in a battle, maybe, where you're losing. Is this our Normandy? I don't know. It'll take years before we figure that out. It's not worth discussing too much at this point, but it is worth discussing. Is this an opportunity? And I think that pro-lifers in many senses can lead the way on this because of all of the different Christian pro-family movements. We're kind of the only one that's really had much success in the last couple of decades.
Yeah. And I think that one of the first things on our list here that I want to highlight is, hey, by the way, nobody complains when we bring up gay marriage. I think we have to. It's just it's there. Like, they invaded us, so we can't really act like they're not there, or we certainly can't say, well, I don't want to deal with you, or we can't say, well, I'm not going to speak up for what I believe. They can hate us for believing that gay marriage is wrong, that homosexual acts are wrong, but it's the truth. According to nature and God, people are like mad that you read the Bible and it's a sin. A lot of things are sins, and they just name it. But the whole notion that we just don't want to deal with it, that doesn't work. But they invaded us. And so we don't get a lot of flack. Nobody emails in. I've gotten email from a donor, actually, who's a homosexual, and wrote me a very wonderful, respectful email about things to keep in mind when we discuss it, and his struggles and all of this, but basically just gave up his email. He said, I can't do it. I gave up. I try, all the stuff that you would imagine. But we don't get a lot of flack. So that's not the reason for this podcast. But the number one reason they're connected is because the homosexuals just jumped on the pro-abortion bandwagon and just married themselves to that, as you mentioned. And now we're in this bizarre post-Roe world where Planned Parenthood is like, the people who will be impacted by Dobbs are blacks, Latinos, and gays. And you're like, I'm not following this. But that's the thing, is that they didn't say, hey, we're gay, but we don't want to hurt a baby. They didn't say that. They said, we're gay, therefore we are absolutely 100% for abortion. I've mentioned on the podcast before, I have met a lot of pro-life people who identify as gay and lesbian, and they're pro-life. They've also told me in those same conversations, I can't say anything about it. My movement will kill me. Well, one guy said that. They'll kill me. And he's against the trans, and he said, they'll really kill me. And he voted for Trump, and he said, that'd be totally the end of me. So they entered into this world, and Steve, it boils down to, I think, sexual license, which certainly abortion is the ultimate example of.
Yeah, because ultimately, when you separate sex from reproduction, there will be deadly consequences. It's no surprise that abortion followed shortly after the universal legalization of contraception in the 60s. These things go hand in hand. And there's a reason for that, because it changes your mentality. If you go back, I'm trying to remember who it was where I heard this from. It may have been a guy named Father Thomas Loya, who's an Eastern Rite Catholic priest, but I think it was him who said, 100 years ago, if somebody had intimate relations outside of marriage and a pregnancy resulted, they would understand, even if however disappointed or sad or afraid they were about what the future held, they would understand that this happened as a result of their actions. And when we now have, thanks to contraception, this widespread idea that you can just turn your fertility on and off like a light switch, now when someone has intimate relations and a baby comes, it's not because of what we did, but it's in spite of what we did. And so these sorts of things go hand in hand. You see the contraception fuel abortion. Contraception fuels the mentality that makes the LGBT thing, seem acceptable. And there's a very tight connection. And when we advance the notion that two people of the same sex can get married or any of these things, it really continues to drive that wedge that has been nailed into the heart of the connection between sex and reproduction. So these things have a very, I think, at their essence, a core connection.
Yeah, and I think in layman's terms, as Peter Kreeft says, contraception is sex without babies, and the ultimate contraceptive is obviously abortion, is actually killing the baby. Obviously, homosexual acts are fornication without babies, sex without babies, whatever you want to say. So there is that connection, but that divorce of sex and procreation, completely that it's not like, oh, it could happen, but that you are absolutely going out of your way to make sure that it doesn't. And if conception happens, you would actually end the life of the product of conception, which is the baby, of course. But as we've seen, and this is something that the LGBTQ community did not do early on, but now they've gone from like, okay, sexual acts they like to do with one another, and they say they're in love, even though we're not going to get into it, but the number of partners the average homosexual has is just like through the roof, which is a hard case for the love part. But that's an attack on nature. But let's say that no, they're in love or whatever. But that has led to the inevitable desire for children, which of course they can't have. And so we see basically now the LGBTQ movement redefining human nature and saying it's normal. We see it through, obviously, abortion. We see it through designer babies, which is a kind of a recent phenomenon. These, oddly, the things that we have to cover on the podcast, 3-parent embryos. That's not natural, FYI. And just the whole experimentation with human and animal hybrid creatures. Embryos,
we have thoroughly entered the realm of science fiction.
The German Shepherd and my buddy from Baltimore. It's just like, what? But that's why. So Family Research Council, I really feel like the Catholic Church was asleep at the wheel, unfortunately, like on many things, at the top with the gay marriage onslaught. John Paul II was not. He was kind of ahead of his time, and certainly Pope Benedict. But just in the United States, there was no pro-marriage like figure within Catholicism. The Family Research Council, which is evangelical, really led the way. It was too little, too late. But I remember watching somebody from FRC on Fox News debate this homosexual guy who was pushing for gay marriage, and the homosexual guy was phenomenal. He was good on the news. He was well spoken. And you're sitting there going, "Yeah, I mean, I guess this makes sense," And FRC, ironically, because it's not Catholic, strictly, was using the arguments from the Catholic arguments of natural law and St. Thomas Aquinas and how everything has a nature, and it doesn't matter if you believe in God or not. Everybody knows that a chair can be used to bash somebody over the head with, but that's a misuse of it. Its nature is that you sit in it. That's not why they make chairs at furniture, outlets and warehouses. They make chairs so we can sit in them. Everything has a nature. We know that. And when you misuse it, although you have the freedom to misuse it, it's not ultimately good for you, and it is disordered, and you can never give order to disorder. And that was really great. But the people say, well, but if you're gay and you don't believe in God, like, what do we care? Why, and that's because it's an attack on nature. And we see this played out because it's natural to desire a child. But in order to desire a child, you have to either have sex with a woman and have a baby, or be infertile and adopt a child. But two dudes adopting a kid so they can raise him or her like an asset is not natural, and everybody knows it. And I think that's still the strongest argument against gay marriage and just homosexuality in general. It doesn't mean that it's not hard and that it's not a struggle, but we just don't affirm men who sleep around on their wives their entire life. We would never say that's good, that's natural, and the wife needs to get over it. No, she's a victim. And we think that it's a victimless crime, and it's not, i.e., designer babies and animal human hybrids.
Yeah, it's just people will kind of like dismiss the slippery slope as like, well, it's a logical fallacy. You can't say that. Like, I wasn't Rick Santorum, I think, was sort of saying like, hey, if you take gay marriage, it's not going to be long before you see a push for pedophilia and polygamy and all these sorts of things. And oh no, he's a hate monger. Well, we're here on the life front too. When you change what it means to be a human being, when you change what it means to be a man or to be a woman, when you change what marriage is, you're going to change other things too. And that doesn't mean that we are the only reason to resist the LGBT movement is because of what it could turn into. At its nature, it needs to be resisted. But evil begets evil, and all these evils have turned into this really tragic situation where, again, creating babies, manufacturing them in labs, working on engineering them the same way we would engineer, the corn crop or the soybeans or many things that don't have the dignity of the human person.
Yeah, I agree. And I remember Rick Santorum saying that. And yeah, the response is that you're a hater, and they've used this very effectively, you fear me. You're afraid of me. You're a homophobe. You're just creeped out. And that's not the case at all. I think that has really been hijacked, I guess, because it has to do with like gay sex. They're just using the whole, well, you're just creeped out by me, or you're afraid of me, you need to get over it, like we're kind of the problem. And I don't think that's the real fear at the nature of the homosexual debate. I don't think it's fear on behalf of the people that say I believe this lifestyle is wrong and it's unnatural. I think the fear is on the other side of, I would have to tell myself no, and I would have to change some things, which is the fear for all of us when dealing with any sin, is that I can't accept this. Other people don't accept it. And that's why we justify things. We justify our sins to ourselves. We have to get to a point where like, no, this is wrong. It doesn't matter how I feel. And I think that's the fear. I think the fear is not actually dealing with it, but embracing it and falling into sin. But it's not dealing with it. And that's the ultimate, that's, to me, that's the fear.
It's sort of a variation on the wealthy young man in scriptures who the Lord asked to sell everything and to follow him, and he went away sad because he had many things. Like when we're asked to give up the things that hurt the most, we can give it all to the Lord, or we can go away sad. And that going away sad has led to a lot of these accusations of the phobias.
It has. And just like our movement with the former abortion workers, these heroes that get out of this lifestyle. And, I heard a podcast with a woman a couple of weeks ago, and she was a lesbian for like, I don't know, 15 years. And she slept with married women, and she just had this crazy lifestyle. I mean, now she's married with little kids, and it was just this, she went down that road. She had father issues, and it was just one of those things. And there's a heterosexual version of that we've all seen, and that they write country songs about, which is the guy, your wild college buddy, and he's just sleeping around with everybody, won't listen to anybody, just kind of a womanizer. And then he meets the one, and he settles down, and he's got the white picket fence, and he's a dad, and nobody saw it coming. He was the wild kid in high school, wild kid in college. He thought marriage was the enemy, and now he lives in the suburbs. That's that version of that. And that was just a sin for him. And it's just a sin for the person who has the homosexual tendencies and acts out on them. And I think that the danger in both, just as in all sin, is this is who you are, and you can't deny it. And anybody who tells you you're not this is a bigot. And that's just a virus, I think, that has a lot of victims. And that leads us to our next point, which is all sins against human nature and human dignity build on one another. You mentioned the Rick Santorum quote. But we see it with so many different things, Steve. And this is where we have a little fun with the baby boomers on the divorce rate and the sexual revolution.
Yeah, we talked about some of these things going together, and that it was no coincidence that abortion followed the advent of contraception, but it goes all the way across. Divorce followed the sexual revolution. Birth control and abortion enable infidelity. They enable divorce. The separation of sex from reproduction has fueled the pornography industry, which makes more money than Hollywood. It's unbelievable. Think about, we went and saw the Mission Impossible movie together, Sean, and there's like all these huge budget, Avenger movies that you and I don't care for, but people do. They're making millions upon billions of dollars, and the pornography industry dwarfs it all. And then, of course, the pornography industry fuels human trafficking. Human trafficking is deeply connected to abortion. There's all of these things go together. There's I hate to bring up, Sean, this is University of Texas. I don't know if I'm allowed to bring that up on the 40 Days for Life podcast when we're in A&M country, particularly with college football right around the corner.
Yeah,
but
we don't
Texas,
like them.
You'll like this one.
I like this one.
Texas professor Mark Regnerus said pornography use, he did research on it, pornography use corresponded with support for same-sex marriage among men. So essentially, when you've got kind of like your own proclivities, we'll say, you start to justify others. It's like the guy who knows he needs to lose weight, but he kind of resents when his friend does, or the person who knows he needs to quit smoking, and then his friend quits smoking and kind of resents him for it. These things, you love to see perversions because it kind of makes you feel not so bad about your own sins. And it just continues down the line. Abortion followed by infanticide, abortion followed by euthanasia for elderly people and terminally ill people, turning into euthanasia for children. All of these things tend to build upon each other. In vitro fertilization, embryo destructive research, they all go together. And so this is kind of my long laundry list of saying you can never separate one crime against the dignity of human nature from another. They follow, they go together, they expand, the snowball starts rolling down the hill, it picks up speed and it gets bigger.
Yeah, and this isn't the nuns hitting people on the hands with the ruler, which is thrown at us a lot. By the way, those nuns were great. Most people, when they're honest, were like, I love those nuns. I had a relative who's like, oh, the nun used to hit me on the hand with the ruler. And I was like, you probably deserved it. He was like, I did. So, but anyways, but everything you said, Steve, it also doesn't make you happy. It doesn't make you happy. It's not a group of people saying you can't act that way because it's a mortal sin, which it is. But that also that won't make you happy. And that to me is the elephant in the room. That's why we ended up with the trans stuff. Like, you just keep pushing, this doesn't work, and I'm not fulfilled, and I'm not fulfilled. And all the people that have come out of the homosexual lifestyle have said that. Many don't. And they're like, no, I'm happy. You're totally wrong. I've loved my life. I'm completely free. And I always ask the backstory. And like, okay, you're totally happy. You're 55 years old. Yeah. Well, what happened? Well, I fell in love with this guy and I left my wife and 3 kids. What? Do you love your wife? This one guy was like, you love your wife? He said, yeah, but I didn't enjoy sex with her. And I'm like, so you left her and your children? And he said, the kids are tough. The kids are tough.
They better be.
And I said, they have to be. It's exactly what I said. So They have to be. You walked out for some dude. And he kind of laughed, but then he quit laughing. And he was more serious, because it's just this, what? You're just like drifting off, following your passions because you didn't enjoy sex with your wife. That's what love is. Love is sex. And that's what we're talking about. That's it. That's why it's so connected to abortion, because sex is the ultimate sacrament, and nothing and no one can get in the way of it, including an unborn child. So, or your own children in that case, and your wife, and it's just awful. But it is the indulgence of self. And that's the fear, Steve. That's why I think fear is on one side of this, is I can't have what I want. And the homosexual movement is brilliant. It's saying, yes, you can, and you'll be better for it. And to hell with everybody who tells you otherwise. And it's a very dangerous mentality. It is marching the drunk into the bar and saying, drinks are on me tonight. I mean, it is just absolute enabling. And that's the connection we mentioned. The sins against nature build on sins against nature. And you see it with IVF. We're creating kids for same-sex couples. Why do we have to do that? Because they can't have kids. Why? Because it's not natural. So it's just that's why the natural law argument, if you want to get into religion, you certainly can. But similar to what to say when, the natural law argument is there's just no God made me this way. That's kind of an argument too that they make, even though sometimes they dismiss God. And the answer is no, he didn't. I mean, we're all fallen. It's the fall of man. We can't root that out of us. God made me this way. I drive drunk. God made me this way. I beat my wife. God made me this way. I cuss at my children in front of their friends. God made me this way. I cheat on my wife. God made me this way. Fill in the blank. And that's the enabling. And that is the fear. Getting rid of the enabling. That's why if you come out against homosexual or we saw the baseball players, Steve, we talked about them on the podcast with the LA Dodgers. If there's any remote sniff of opposition, they just crush you. I mean, they cancel you, they crush you, they call you all these names. And I just think we're past that. I think it's like, okay, I'm a bigot, I'm a homophobe, get it all out of your system. What's natural about this? And I think we do have to have compassion when we have the opportunity. Sometimes we don't even get a word in because there's just a lot of screaming. But we also have to speak the truth in love. And I think the most silenced group in America is, number one, homosexuals who got out of the lifestyle. And number two, homosexuals who are in the lifestyle who are against gay marriage. Those are the two most silenced group of people in our country. But going back to the kids. So one of our points on this is, like abortion, the LGBTQ sins are getting increasingly bizarre, frankly, and just sort of, there's nothing new under the sun. In the end, it's all just like fornication. But it's getting weird, Steve, and it's always going to end up turning on children.
Always hurts kids. And that's a big connection here for what does this have to do with abortion for as you said, we don't get a ton of people to ask, but we sometimes do. And this is an important point because I think it was 6 years ago, you were in the UK and you were out at the vigil for Charlie Gard. And why were you there? What did it have to do with abortion? He wasn't aborted. No, it was harm being done to a child. And we're going to stand against that every opportunity there is to stand against it. And these LGBTQ attitudes really victimize children in some profound ways. I don't even know why drag shows are a thing in the first place. I don't understand the appeal the slightest bit. But as you said, Sean, it's an invasion. They're coming after the kids. They're going after the kids, and in more ways than one. People don't like to hear this, but the adoption of children into same-sex households is terrible for the children. It's awful. Children need a mother and a father. Oh, well, what about if the dad dies? Yeah, that's a tragedy. That is an awful thing, but no one's out there seeking to establish families with dead dads. It's not something anybody would want. You're just having to deal with contingencies. Another way we now, that speaking of increasingly bizarre attacks on children, you've got what they call the trans men, who are the women who pretend they're men. They get pregnant. They claim to be men while they're pregnant, while they're breastfeeding or chest feeding or whatever the heck they call it. They're jacking them full of testosterone. Nobody cares about the impact on the kids. Nobody cares whatsoever. Or then you've got the trans, I lose track of what the trans men is and what the trans women is, but they're jacking them full of various other hormones, and nobody seems to really be concerned about the men who are actually men, but they claim to be women. They're jacking them full of hormones so that they can breastfeed, I guess. I don't I don't want to know more, don't want to know how it works. But nobody seems to be concerned about how the kids are, because if you even question that, you're a hater, you're a phobe. And these are real connections, because if you turn kids into a commodity that you can destroy through abortion, or that you can acquire to fulfill your desired family, because you can't create your family the way it's been done for many thousands of years, it's just bad news all the way around.
It is bad news. And as we say all this, the listener, the viewer, I think what we encounter a lot, and I encounter it, I have gay family members. And I think for most people, because they don't want to deal with it, they don't want to talk about this. They don't want to, we're very lazy with the homosexual movement. I think as Christians, we just don't want to deal with it. Love who you love, leave me alone. And now they're not leaving us alone. So that's why you see Pride Month going down the toilet. But,
sir, I would love to leave you alone.
Sir,
there's nothing I would enjoy more than leaving you alone.
I am a gay man. I don't care, and that's really been our response, for better or for worse, and probably for worse. At least telling somebody they're a sinner, telling ourselves first and foremost, but it's like you care about them. I think that's a Walker Piercy quote. Like the only thing that made me feel human is the fact that I could disobey God. That was my only connection to him, and it led to conversion. Out of the moviegoer, Steve. But what happens is you talk about this stuff, and everything we're saying makes sense according to us. People can write in and say, no, it doesn't. But you got to create kids in tubes for trans couples or gay couples because they naturally cannot have kids. Okay. And it's unnatural to have two dads. That's why there's books about it. Two mommies, two dads. You know why you got to write books about that? Because it's not true. It's not natural. There's no book about you were born and you were conceived by a male and a female, and that's how you came to be. There's no like adult like book about that. Okay. It doesn't require justification. But you say all this stuff and people hear it, Steve, and they say, hey, my son's gay. Or my aunt's gay. Or my friend at work is really sweet. She's gay. Why do you hate her? And that's the distraction, is that it's personal. And we all have friends in our lives. Hopefully they're real friends, that when you're doing something bad, you could be dating a bad guy, a bad girl. You could be having sex before marriage. You could be on drugs. All of our real friends don't affirm that, right? And this is the one thing that it's like, hey, I work with a guy. He's very nice. He's a very caring person, and he's gay. And there's no doubt the guy's caring. There's no doubt he's probably a good person. But it's like, this always gets a pass, and anyway, I've had relatives that worked in the ERs, and ER, I didn't know that, but like the show, like there's a lot of promiscuity. There's a lot of cheating on spouses and in that world. It's kind of new to me.
Like the doctors?
Yes.
And the nurses and stuff? Okay.
And everybody write in if you worked in the ER, but somebody who's worked in the ER for a long period of time, it's pretty crazy. No wonder they made a show about it. But it's not just the drama of working in an ER, but just a lot of adultery. And it's like, yeah, Dr. So-and-so's a scumbag, and we all know it. It's not, hey, good for him,
living his best life.
A nice guy. He's a really nice guy. He's a good cook. I mean, we just don't do that except with this. And I want to address that because it hasn't happened to us. But I know it's happened to other people, other groups, where they like say something about gay marriage and somebody emails in as like, my nephew's gay. And we know people are out there living this lifestyle. That's why we're doing it. And we know it's in all families. Like, that's not the point. And that Steve, is similar to abortion. That you can talk about what to say when all day long. You can talk about life begins at conception. You can talk about late-term abortion. You can talk about Leroy Carhart. You can talk about all these things. And somebody will say, hey, my sister had an abortion.
So you're saying she's a murderer?
Yeah. Or you're saying something's wrong with it just in general. It's if something is personal, then it's okay. And that's the fear. We don't want to do that. We don't want to, in our world is so, our moral relativism, we're so simple. We're so, but as if embracing your sister's abortion is good for your sister. That's the first lie. And that somehow something that was wrong until you walk in their shoes, Steve, like something that was wrong, but then it happens to you and now it's right. That is the loss of objectivity, and it's not good.
Think about Sue Thayer. Remember, she was telling us that she had, I think, pastors who were just straight up with her about it. She's like, it hurts, but it planted the seeds that led me out of abortion down the line.
Well, Sue said something I would never tell a pro-lifer to say to an abortion worker, but she said that preacher was out there and he said, better that you were never born than to hurt these little ones. And if you hurt any child of mine, you might as well have a millstone wrapped around your neck and thrown into the sea. And I mean, you tell that to an abortion worker, they're just going to be like, number one, you're a nut, or number two, like, what a judgmental a-hole, and just dig into their abortion career. Sue went home and like Googled millstone, like, how much does that weigh? I mean, she thought the guy was crazy, but she's like, what if by some 1% possibility that's true? Like, how much does that weigh? And she Googled it. And I forget on the podcast when she shared the story, I don't remember what it is. It's like 2 tons or something. I don't remember what it is, how much it weighs, but you're going to the bottom.
And fast.
And that doesn't mean we run up to somebody and, like a jerk and say, you're gay, you're going to burn in hell. Because number one, we don't know that. And number two, that doesn't win anybody over. We all know that. But what we're doing, I think, as a society, and we've done it with abortion, that's why these are so closely tied, is we're denying nature and we're just accepting it because we don't want to deal with it. And that is where this is different than any other issue. And this is our last point, because it's like, well, why focus on this? Why even mention it? Because there's a lot of sins against human dignity. There's racism. There's the immigration crisis. Do we go to war in Ukraine, or do we not even care about Ukraine? Why is Ukraine our business? Ukraine is now like, you're either a really big humanitarian or you're a jerk. We don't spend money on our own border for our own citizens. We spend money on Ukrainians. Is that right or wrong? We think about all this. But racism, we'll use that because that's a big movement, obviously. There's no corporation. The LA Dodgers don't have a racist day where you get like a little KKK outfit with like, Oral Hershiser's number on the back. Okay. There's no racist training, how to be a racist by Apple. But there is for gay marriage. There is for the Dodgers and the baseball team. There is that sort of forced thing. And you're like, that's ridiculous. Now you're saying that gay, being gay is like being a racist. I'm not, but they're connected, because forcing that on people who don't believe it for religious reasons is bigotry. It just is. Coca-Cola doesn't care that everybody drinks their Coke. And they're based in Atlanta. Georgia's very evangelical. They don't care. They're like, no, we're going to have the gay logo during Pride Month, although they didn't this year. So that whole notion that this must be accepted by everybody, we don't do that with other attacks on human dignity, and we do it with this.
We do. Yeah, there's nobody out there in favor of these things. And plus, I would sort of make the counterpoint. we do talk about these other issues all the time,
Yeah.
racism in particular. How often have we talked? We've done entire podcasts on the racism of Margaret Sanger. We've done entire podcasts about eugenics. We've asked the question repeatedly, including in What to Say When. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that Black women are disproportionately likely to have an abortion compared with a white woman or with other races? We've talked about the immigration issue, the exploitation of Myra Rodriguez, the Planned Parenthood manager who was fired for blowing the whistle on botched abortions and then was threatened with deportation by her employer, by Planned Parenthood, because she blew that whistle. We've talked about abortion facilities being located in predominantly Black neighborhoods and minority neighborhoods. We've talked about exploitation of the poor. Why don't you care about the kids who are already here? What about the people who are poor? There's already too many mouths to feed in this world. We've talked about that. We talk about all these things. Any attack on human dignity, we're gonna discuss on this podcast and in 40 Days for Life, because ultimately our mission is abortion. We're gonna specialize in trying to pray to end abortion, because if you try to take on every issue in the world, you're not going to do any of them particularly well.
Yeah.
But we're also going to admit and recognize and discuss and be part of the broader conversation about all of these crimes against humanity, frankly, which are related to abortion. And this is one of them.
It is one of them. It's also, you mentioned race and poverty. Those are used to justify abortion. And now homosexuality is used to justify abortion. That Dobbs will negatively impact minorities, the poor, and the homosexuals. And I guess they're just putting all minorities in a bucket and saying, you have to be pro-choice. But, and of course, they all impact abortion. They all impact abortion. And, you can't run out and solve all the world's problems, but you need to address when something as this did just invaded the pro-life movement. It really did, because the homosexuals just decided we are absolutely 100% pro-abortion and there will be no compromise. Doesn't make sense. They didn't have to do it, but when your identity becomes your identity, and that can lead you to, you just sort of have to believe this. And that led to a very pro-abortion gay community. So I think that this isn't the hardest stance to have, Steve, today. I think divorce is, because that's just like as we mentioned, 4% of the population is gay. So people have gay family members or friends or whatever. But everybody's divorced. Everybody's divorced, and most churches have completely embraced it, and some see it as like a good thing. And but as far as like the teachings of Jesus, I think that if you want to see your pastor or your priest get murdered, they can preach against divorce and that
and contraception.
And contraception, but I think divorce is worse. I think
really okay.
I mean, it gets deep. Oh yeah, it gets deep, and it's a problem. It's a problem. It's a problem that was used to justify gay marriage. And just because heterosexual marriage is in bad shape, that doesn't mean we have to reinvent it or change it. Nor does it mean it's possible to change it. So, anyways, but I do think it's a tough thing for people. I think people have kind of given up, and I don't like that, because then you're giving up on the people struggling with this, and we should never give up on them. And whether they think it's absurd that we oppose them or not, we have to let them know we do not oppose them. We do not oppose them, and they cannot believe the lie that you cannot hate the sin without loving the sinner. It's total nonsense. And the millions of conversions over the last 100 years, certainly thousand years, prove that, because Christianity is made up of sinners. So speaking of, if you want to have a strong conversion story to inspire you this fall, as we head into 40 Days for Life and we get a little bit of cooler weather and Steve starts using his Packer tickets that all of our listeners told him to get, you need to read Scalpel in the Soul by Haywood Robinson, Dr. Haywood Robinson. This is a beautiful book. We're getting so much great feedback. Haywood just signed like 2,000 more copies, I know, at our warehouse. So Be sure to order directly from us. You can get it on Amazon, but if you order directly from us, you can get one of those signed copies. They still have some left. So be sure to get Scalpel in the Soul. It's a book like no other, and you don't expect a lot of it. There's a lot of this in there. There's a lot. Haywood gets into the sexual revolution for sure in Scalpel in the Soul. And of course, he wrote it with Dr. Noreen Johnson, his late wife, who passed away in the midst of writing Scalpel in the Soul. And so it's just a beautiful, beautiful love story and a beautiful story of the gospel. So be sure to go to 40daysforlifegear.com and get your copy of Scalpel in the Soul. Until then, we await the report from Steve Carlin. I'm so excited about your first Packer game, and we'll get a full report, I'm sure, in the next couple of weeks. We hope you enjoy your fall and stay right here. We have some big news coming, and we're going to talk a lot about that over the coming weeks on the podcast. So do not miss the upcoming month's episode. It will be fiery, I promise. All right. Thank you, Steve. Please rate, review, share this podcast, and we will see you next time. God bless you.